Okay, thank you, Rick. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Bracken, President and CEO of the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to the second in a series of 5 webinars that the New Jersey Chamber is co-hosting with Bank of America. We call this series the Business Case for Diversity because a diverse business sees tangible benefits to its bottom line. Today's webinar, I think, will give you a good feel for that. Before I get into any more detail, let me just tell you that in New Jersey, we are experiencing a networking issue. So there might be moments where we freeze up, but just bear with us. We're just going to have to work through it. It's totally out of our control, and just one of the wonderful benefits of being in an overly technological environment here. So many businesses across New Jersey are trying to return to COVID normality, but one big problem that they have is the lack of qualified and willing workers to come back to work. Today's speakers are going to discuss some of the very different ways to address this problem, and diversity is a key element to that solution. Our speakers today will be Jamie Francis and Latricia Boone, both from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Jamie is the Director of Programs and Operations for the U.S. Chamber Foundation Center for Education and Workforce, and Latricia is Vice President in charge of the U.S. Chamber's Equality of Opportunity Initiative, which we have totally embraced here in New Jersey. In fact, Latricia joined us for a webinar in April to discuss the Equality of Opportunity Initiative and has received great receptivity from our members. Today, Jamie and Latricia will focus on a number of ways for finding and developing worker talent. But before they begin, let me just give you a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded and a replay will be made available beginning tomorrow. Second, after Jamie and Latricia complete their presentations, we will have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please access that through the chat box, and we will get to as many questions as we can before the 10 o'clock cutoff. Ray Zardetto of the Chamber will be moderating that Q&A session. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank Bank of America, our partner and sponsor for this series of webinars. I would like to acknowledge Alberto Garofalo, the President of Bank of America in New Jersey, a member of the New Jersey Chamber's Board of Directors. Unfortunately, Alberto could not be on today, but he's been a great partner, and Bank of America has been a stalwart corporate supporter of diversity and inclusion and supporting all of that initiative in partnership with us. This year, by the way, Bank of America has announced it is committing $1.2 billion over 5 years, that's billion with a B, to programs advancing racial equality and economic opportunity. An enormous commitment. And I would also tell you that in addition to those dollars, they are committing a lot of sweat equity of their people to do the work that's going to be needed to really enhance and support and make those dollars much more successful. There is more information about this initiative on Bank of America's website, so please check it out if you desire to do that. But right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Latricia Boone from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Latricia?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, and good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here again, and thank you again for hosting us. As shared, I'm Latricia Boone, Vice President of the Equality of Opportunity Initiative at the U.S. Chamber. I had the opportunity to share more about the Equality of Opportunity Initiative in the first webinar of this series, and just feel honored to be able to come back to share more about our work and specifically talk about this work as it relates to employment and workforce, which is a huge priority area for us through our EOI work. Many of you who attended that webinar or may have just heard through engagement with the U.S. Chamber that we launched the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, which we also refer to as EOI, a little more than a year ago, with the goal of uniting the business community around a mutual agenda where we're focused on advancing data-driven. I really underscore data-driven because we've done a lot of research related to this initiative and looked into what are some of the gaps that exist and why and what those root causes are. And then we want to be able, through that, using that data, really influence and advance policy solutions that are going to actually help close what we know to be existing race-based opportunity gaps. And so we focus on 6 important key areas that come out of that data and research that we did, and that's education, employment, entrepreneurship, criminal justice, health, and wealth. And so I think today's conversation will be a lot around employment. Education is, it's connected in some ways, and you'll hear as I talk through that, but those are our focus areas. Since we launched, we've really been doubling down on this work. I started with the Chamber in February of this year, but the work was happening well before I started, and we've continued to. And I think what we are so grateful for are the partnerships we have. We have partnered with state and local chambers across the country and members of the business community to make progress on our goals in this area. We're hosting a number of convenings, doing briefings with key stakeholders, doing a lot in Washington to work on advancing legislative bills. And we've also kicked off some initiatives related to this work, which I'm going to talk about today. And I'm just proud of how it's moving forward. But I will say it's conversations like this that really make a difference in how we translate what we're doing nationally at the U.S. Chamber to real impact in our state and local communities, because you all are really doing the work in so many ways and helping us to realize when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, what that looks like in companies and communities. And so I, again, am excited for this conversation because I think that it's an opportunity for us to talk about some of the things that we are hearing nationally, but looking forward to hearing some of your questions and thoughts around how that can translate to what you're doing. We don't have all the answers, but we do want to add value to your conversations and hear from you so that as we're building out our national initiatives, we have the perspective of the state and local chambers that we work with across the country. So as we think about workforce challenges that are facing many of you and frankly employers across the country, we know that these challenges are increasing and have become even more urgent over the past years, which poses an ultimate threat, obviously, to our fragile economy. And what we're hearing from business leaders like yourselves every day is that the lack of available workers is just holding up and causing stagnation in growth and opportunity. So when we talk about our EOI initiative and opportunity, it's all connected in so many ways. And so we want to make sure that there's alignment in how this work is moving forward. So the chamber itself, hearing some of those things, launched another initiative this year, or earlier this year, called our America Works initiative, which is a national effort that's around mobilizing industry and government to take swift action to address what we see as a deepening workforce crisis, kind of calling it Operation Warp Speed for jobs, because our goal is to get people connected with jobs and jobs connected with people. This really includes multi-pronged strategy and focus. So we're working on federal and state level policy advocacy. We are uplifting employer-led solutions. So what we might be hearing from employers in one space, we are sharing with others across the country so that you understand what some of those best practices are. We are polling, we're doing research, we're pulling in data, and just focused on attacking this from many angles. We believe skill building is important, offering resources. One area we focus on is access to childcare, because we recognize that in many communities, and particularly for those that we work with through our Equality of Opportunity initiative, that is an important area. And then legal immigration reforms is also a focus for us through our America Works initiative. But the connection with equality of opportunity is really important to our America Works, because we know that these challenges actually present an opportunity for us to think differently about how we expand and broaden our workforce strategies. EOI is about how we close employment gaps for historically underserved communities, and America Works is about how we, again, connect jobs and people so that there is a mutual benefit on both sides. And I will say that, when we talk about our quality of opportunity work, we recognize that diversity and inclusion, equality are not just moral imperatives. They are matters of economic competitiveness. And with the growing skills gap and more jobs and the shrinking pool of candidates, we have to think a bit differently about what recruitment looks like and how diversity and inclusion shows up. And that means an opportunity to look at a pool of candidates that we may not have thought about before. And so we are highlighting ways to tap into an essential pool of quality candidates and think about that and what it means to bringing innovation and new perspectives in other areas. I've talked about this before in our last call, but one of the initiatives that we have is our Next Gen for Business program at the U.S. Chamber, where we have a unique partnership with historically Black colleges and universities across the country to bring students in for internships, but also to expose them to workforce and career opportunities. We work with a number of our member companies who are bringing these students into their spaces, but we, the Chamber, also bring students in from these historically Black colleges and universities, also minority serving institutions, to learn more about business experience and what it could look like for themselves for careers. So these are folks that are working in these organizations while they're still students, getting experiences, and they're, a pipeline or a pool to tap into even beyond when they're graduates. And, for some jobs that may not be the pool to go after, but we do see great opportunities in that for sure. The other thing that we're looking at is how government can help remove barriers to enable more folks who want to seek and successfully attain employment. And so we've been working with the private sector and the government to support employment opportunities for the formerly incarcerated through our second chance hiring initiatives, ban the box, clean slate hiring laws, occupational licensing reform, and initiatives such as that. We actually hosted an event in August of this year, one second chance hiring, where we highlighted some of the big employers where it might be, I won't say easier, but they have some things in place where efficiencies might show up for them to consider second chance hiring. So we had Walmart, JP Morgan Chase, who are doing this work, but we also had some small employers who were talking about their own experiences with second chance hiring and what are some of the strategies that they've employed and what they've seen. And what we heard from folks is that they've had some very positive experience in this space of, again, employing a new strategy, looking at a workforce that they may have not typically looked at, but folks who have come in and been reliable and ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. So, we released a report as a part of this initiative and outlined some data, key data in that report. And what we know is that 70 million people across this country have an arrest record. That's our reality. Many come from marginalized communities and have been unable to participate fully in our economy. So how can we think about that as a pool that we can tap into? And what we have learned in talking to our employers who are thinking about second chance hiring, they have found that hiring the informally incarcerated has actually helped to reduce turnover and improve performance. So we do see that as a space and place where we can lean in. And beyond second chance hiring, we are really thinking about how we can connect our businesses and employers with tools and resources to connect back to community. I think we think it is really important to think about the relationships you can build locally with organizations that you may not have thought of. And it really is specific to your particular location. So, there's some national organizations, but we are really wanting folks to think broadly about where can you build some key relationships with organizations and entities and communities who are working with certain populations, and to be able to connect you with those who are in need of a secure and stable employment. I know my colleague, Jamie Francis, is going to speak a bit more about how the Chamber Foundation is helping to build stronger partnerships and networks at the state and local level. And we have a really great opportunity through our talent pipeline management work. But essentially through our EOI work, what we are promoting is that there is an opportunity to connect with groups that are serving those whom you, again, may not have considered previously in your talent pipeline. So how do you begin to identify where those opportunities exist so that this could be, I think, for some more immediate workforce needs. And we are urging that even beyond our immediate needs, how do we think strategically about the long-term needs and how, again, we might build those connections to yield outcomes down the road. And that's where connections with HBCUs, or not just HBCUs, but universities in general who are connected locally, who are connected to students, and they're thinking about ways to, even students who come from diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences are looking for opportunities. And the other thing I'll say is there are professional organizations that are supporting and working with key groups. And so how do you get connected with some of those chapters locally to, again, think about workforce needs and to strategize together on what that could look like? The last thing I'll say, and it somewhat relates to the second chance hiring piece, is we've been having conversations with folks who are working in that space of working with formerly incarcerated individuals about how we build business coalitions at the local level. So businesses, folks who are working with formerly incarcerated folks, working with them to help them find jobs, but also for skill building to start connecting with, if we have a need locally that we need more, I'm just going to throw out there, CDL drivers or folks who are coding, we can start to think more broadly and strategically about how we can build in those skill sets for folks who are, have not been invested in, formerly incarcerated, or whatever that looks like, to give them those skill sets to open up access to a workforce that are going to meet the needs that we know we have. And so I say all that as an example to say, thinking about how you might build similar business coalitions, not just for hiring formerly incarcerated, but more broadly, locally, to outline what are the needs of our business needs of our community? What do we need as an employer? And how can we connect that back with the broader ecosystem? So we're not just trying to recruit ourselves in a silo, but we're looking at organizations that we can work with to help with skill building, to help with broadening the focus and getting folks connected to jobs. So that's just another example of a strategy that we're seeing folks do at state and local level, and they are seeing success. And of course, it's, again, not just for the immediate needs, but helping them think long-term about how they're building relationships that are going to meet the needs of their company and their business for the future as well. I am going to turn it over to Jamie because I said a lot and I want Jamie to get a chance to, again, talk about our talent pipeline management, but I will still be here for questions as we move into the next piece of the program. Thank you.
What a great transition, Latricia. Thanks. Particularly that focus on really recognizing the need for us to be thinking about our business strategies, our talent strategies as long-term solutions and not just what's going to help us in this very short period of time. Because ultimately, if we just kind of continue to apply the Band-Aid effect, then we're going to find ourselves in the same talent challenge position that we currently are, and that, quite frankly, we were having prior to even the pandemic. It's exacerbated a lot of talent challenges for many industries, many types of businesses all across the country, no matter what size, no matter what industry. I think that it's highlighted a lot of the systemic challenges that we have. And through talent pipeline management, what we've been able to demonstrate is that the framework that I'm going to speak about can be applied even in times of great crisis that we're experiencing now, without really needing to completely reorient the way that we go about the process. So let me start off kind of at the 30,000 foot level in terms of what TPM is, how it connects to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and give you all an example of what it looks like at work, because I think that sometimes that can really help people kind of connect all of these dots. But talent pipeline management is an employer-led solution for business talent challenges. So this was founded on the principles of supply chain management. We find that many of the Chamber's membership are very familiar with supply chain management. It's how they run their businesses on a day-to-day, and that we really need to be putting employers in the leadership position to be able to communicate exactly what their needs are. So if a company sells a product, they know who their suppliers are, they know when they're going to expect that product, to what quality standards, at which location. And yet we don't have that same feedback loop for people. We put up these help wanted signs and expect people to come exactly as we need them to be, without really being clear communicators. And that's not to put the entire fault or blame on the employer community. Obviously, that's who we love working with on an everyday basis. But it's just to demonstrate the power of employer leadership and that critical importance and the role that they play in being really clear communicators about what our talent needs are. So if we can kind of build on this concept of supply chain management and say the employer is the end customer in a talent supply chain. So if a student starts off at the beginning of their education experience, we want to make sure that every step along the way, they are gaining value as they go through work-based learning opportunities or receiving support services or go through a new training program. How can we as employers demonstrate and very clearly signal these are the pathways that work really well to successfully transition from your education and training experience into employment? So we built a framework several years ago and have been testing it out with partners all across the country now for the past 6 years. As a result of some piloting that we did in various industries, we were able to build a very authentic framework and guidebook for folks so that they can understand how can I as an employer change the way that I run my business processes, my talent processes in ways that benefit me, that benefit my education and training partners, and certainly that benefit the learners and workers that we're trying to have fill our critical jobs. TPM is completely based on employers identifying a pain point. What is keeping you all up at night? Is it that you have unfilled job openings? Is it some of the turnover retention issues? Is it a lack of career advancement opportunities? Or you find that you have a really difficult time transitioning people from entry-level jobs to more advanced jobs? Is it diversity and equity and inclusion? Is it that you recognize that your talent does not represent the community in which you all live, and that you recognize that there are great benefits to having a more diverse workforce? And then in my mind, that diversity challenge can apply to all of the others, because as Latricia said, what research has found, we've heard from many employers anecdotally, but of course also you can see the results quantitatively to see that oftentimes if you are hiring a more diverse workforce, you're seeing improved retention rates. You're seeing more likely that folks are going to fill jobs faster and stay in those jobs longer, and that it does result in increased productivity and effectiveness for companies. So there are so many benefits and opportunities to apply a diversity focus, even if what's really bugging you at night is that you can't fill that specific job as hard as you might try. So TPM is meant to be that guidebook, because we recognize that you as employers, you're part of a lot of conversations. You're oftentimes part of public-private partnerships, or you're serving on an advisory board for an institution. And those are all wonderful things to do for your community and to do for your business. But the ultimate question is, are you recognizing and are you realizing a positive return on investment through that involvement? So we find that a lot of employers get to participate in conversations, but they don't necessarily get to lead that conversation based on what's really ailing them. And that's why so many of our TPM practitioners are folks from chambers of commerce, people who are accustomed to bringing together employers and having them walk through together the challenges that they're experiencing and supporting you in the ways that we can. So we teach this framework that we've built through an academy process, in which it's usually chambers of commerce who go through that academy training. And essentially, this is what they're meant to do, is they're meant to learn how do we facilitate these conversations in an effective way so that the employers that we're working with do realize a positive return on investment for those unfilled job openings, for their turnover and retention issues, for exorbitant onboarding and training costs, or trying to increase diversity within their companies. Once there's some agreement on what that pain point is, they would then walk through a process to say, okay, what are those most critical jobs that we need to fill? How many of them are there? Because even though numbers shouldn't determine criticality, that's not necessarily the one that you're having the most difficulty filling. That's going to be important information for us to supply to our education and training partners down the line. The next step is we really need to look at our job descriptions and how are we communicating to the outside world? What are the competencies, the skills, the credentials that are associated with these critical jobs? Is there any opportunity for us as a group of employers to come to some consensus on what those most critical competencies are? So not every company needs to agree on every single skill that's most essential for that job for their specific company. But imagine how powerful it would be if 20 of you from the same industry were able to say to all your education and training partners, we've all agreed that these 15 core competencies, these 15 skills is what is absolutely critical for a person to be able to do on day one. And then through our onboarding process, I'm going to take care of that, other maybe 10 to 20% of skills that are very unique to my specific company. How much faster you might get that talent, how much more effective the training provided by that provider partner might be. That's one of those things in TPM that I just get really jazzed about, because I've seen it in practice and just how effective it can be in terms of just kind of clearing up some miscommunication between an employer and education and training partners. From there, we're then looking at, well, where do we get our talent from? And this is where a big part of our DEI focus comes in that if you continue to go to the same talent sources and they are not providing training and education to the priority population that you've identified, well, you're not really going to increase diversity within your workforce, right? So to Latricia's point, partnerships with HBCUs, community-based organizations, staffing agencies, other ways that you can tap into a more diverse workforce is right there in front of us. It's just that usually we're going to the same well again and again and expecting a different result. We need to have and arm ourselves with that data so that we can better understand where could we get diverse talent from that will help us, solve lots of talent challenges while also adding that benefit of diversifying our workforce. All of this is an employer-led data collection process. So it may sound challenging, but it's data that you all actually have at your fingertips in your HR information systems, your applicant tracking systems, or even just going around and talking to your folks, talking to your employees about what their training experiences were. So it does not have to be extremely complicated, but we find that this data collection process, and I love that Latricia touched on that data-driven piece of this early on in her presentation, it's so incredibly important because it's going to help us get better. It's going to help us be more effective. And we find that the most important data that we can get our hands on is data that's coming directly from your company. And this is all done at the aggregate level so that it protects your proprietary information as you work alongside other employers. But it's all very much driven on what are your expectations? How do you define success? As we go through the TPM process, we want to continuously ask ourselves that question so that we make sure that we're staying on track and that we're meeting expectations of employers, because this is meant to be an employer-led process. So that positive return on investment piece that I mentioned at the beginning, that's really what's going to drive this. And we'll be able to be more clear communicators to those partners, those provider partners that we've said, hey, those folks do a great job of supplying us with the talent that we need. Let's make sure that we're working in sync with one another so that we are mutually benefiting from this more effective partnership. And we're going to consistently supply them with information so that we can make sure that we are tracking in the positive direction. And then the last step in the TPM process is all about continuous improvement. We're not going to get everything right straight out of the gate, but what we are finding is that folks are able to fill those job openings faster with less money involved. They are able to increase their retention rates. They are able to increase and diversify their workforce in a way that benefits everyone. That comes back to that concept of shared value that we get from supply chain management. So by working more effectively together, we're very confident that employers of all industries, this has been tested out in about 30 industries now, in almost every state in the country. New Jersey is not one of our TPM states yet, and I would love for it to be, but we're seeing this work. And I'll just take one more minute to provide you guys with an example so that you can kind of wrap your heads around, what does this framework look like in actual practice, by telling you about a group of energy companies out of a state in the Midwest, in which folks were just really experiencing high turnover. They found that more than 50% of their workforce was going to be eligible for retirement in the next 5 years, and simply did not see a big pipeline coming out of the K-12 or the post-secondary system. So realized, for our gas and electric line workers, we're going to find ourselves in a really hard position in the next couple of years. So by participating as part of a coalition, they decided that they wanted to test out TPM. They had been having a lot of conversations for the past couple of years, but did not really find that it was leading them anywhere, that they were getting anywhere. But by following the TPM framework, they got organized. They got their facts straight. They figured out exactly how many positions they needed to fill. They revised their job descriptions so that they were more relevant in terms of what those critical competencies and needs were. They figured out where their most successful talent came from and identified a couple of preferred partners. They said, we really want to focus on our relationships with a couple of these partners and update our facilities, our training, what's involved in the onboarding process for our companies. They were able to work with the State Department of Education to get energy recognized as a 17th career cluster, which opened up a whole lot of funding and opportunities for them to educate folks in the K-12 system about careers in the energy industry. By going through all of this work, companies were able to have their retention rates increase and skyrocket because of those preferred provider partnerships with those 3 partners. They were able to increase the number of veterans, which was a big priority for many of the companies because they had identified a preferred provider that worked specifically for veterans, and they were able to decrease their onboarding costs. One company reports that they decreased their onboarding costs by $30,000 per hire. That company has now hired more than 300 people from these preferred pipelines of talent, saving them millions and millions of dollars that they're reinvesting in trying to apply TPM to other jobs within their company because of the success that they've experienced. So it does look a little bit different from community to community, but it's been really rewarding to see the different ways that people have leaned on to the framework in ways to really think about long-term talent strategies and solutions. So we're excited and hopeful to get to bring you all into that fold in coming months, hopefully. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm also going to be supplying some slides to Ray and Rick to pass on to you all after the presentation today, so that you can take a look at what that framework looks like question by question, and always feel free to follow up in the case that you do have additional discussion points that you'd like to take. So with that, Ray, I think I'm handing it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Latricia. So let me just back it up and let's put some grounding behind some of it. So, and U.S. Chamber is very famous for doing a lot of research, a lot of really detailed research when they take on an issue. So when we're talking about shortage of workers, certainly in New Jersey, it's an acute problem. I think you both know. What do you find is the prime reason for this shortage? What is the prime reason why we can't, our employers here in the state can't find the workers they need, where they need them, when they need them?
I'm happy to start and then pass it on.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll start and then pass it on to Latricia. So there's obviously never one reason, right? There are many reasons. And as we mentioned, while the gap between number of unemployed people and number of open jobs continues to widen, potentially as a result of the pandemic. But many of these issues were also around prior to the pandemic. So even before then, we had millions of people who were unemployed and millions of open jobs in many, many different types of industries. So as a result of the pandemic, I think a lot of folks know those reasons is that, people still don't necessarily feel safe returning to their old jobs. Some folks are still having childcare issues. Some folks have decided to leave the industry that they were originally in, that this has provided them that aha moment. I need to be thinking about something else because they don't feel as if they have that kind of sustainability within that industry because of a shift like the pandemic. But before then, a lot of this, in my opinion, is a communications issue and the fact that we're not training people for the jobs that many employers have open. And we're not clearly communicating what those job opportunities are, what the various pathways are into those jobs. So there's a lot of that communication that is a challenge for the employer community and the education community. And that's one of the things that we're trying to solve through TPM is through more clear communication. We think that we can create more effective partnerships and help put people on pathways that lead to those good jobs.
Yeah, I think Jamie absolutely hit on it. And we actually, through our America Works initiative, surveyed folks basically to get some numbers. And what we found is some of the factors contributing to your question, Ray, is that, this has been said, and I don't know if it's exactly relevant now or what's in New Jersey, but of course, unemployment benefits was one of the reasons. And that was a smaller percentage of about 16%. Child care and family care needs was a little bit of a larger percentage. And there were respondents who said that they felt like they lacked the skills and experience necessary for the jobs that were available at this time. And so to Jamie's point, I think there's some disconnectedness and a need to ensure that folks actually have been trained and that what they're learning or what they're doing or can be upskilled or retrained to do or meet the needs of what the workforce needs are in this moment.
Before we get to some of the specifics about the TPM and say there's some of the others, just one follow-up question to that. So we're in the fall and we're starting to get into the colder weather. Here comes winter again, and we all know what happened last year with COVID and the winter with and more people being inside. Are you expecting that the worker shortage going to continue through the winter based on some of the things you were just saying about the fact people are still concerned or, concerned for their own safety about going back to the workforce, back to the office?
I would say, our hypothesis is yes. Yes, we do think that the shortage will continue and that we may see increases in what that looks like just because of, to your point, a lot of factors, but there's still folks who feel, a safety issue. And even in talking to companies, and this is not that we haven't done specific that I know of research, but there are many companies right now, right, that are experiencing people who are resigning due to other things, whether it be vaccine mandates or so there are some other things at play right now that I do think are going to impact what we see going into the winter.
And if I may, one thing that I've tried to encourage our TPM practitioners to think about is if that is the hypothesis, right? And so often we're focused on like these short-term solutions is, well, let's then use this as an opportunity to be thinking about, okay, if I know that this is going to be an issue for me now, it's likely also going to be an issue for me in a couple of months. What can I go ahead and start doing? What are the conversations that I can start having? And be really proactive and try to use it as an opportunity, which I know is tough because we're all going to be struggling from not meeting our quarter expectations or even the following quarter expectations. But let's try to be thinking about, okay, how can I be more intentional about my partnerships and seek out some of these new partnerships, whether it's a second chance hiring program or thinking about, a new relationship with a community-based organization. Go ahead and start to have those conversations now, right? As we prepare for the winter and figure out how you are going to integrate that as part of your long-term talent strategy versus like, this is just what I need now, so I'm going to go ahead and try to get these jobs filled. It's okay, how can I be intentional about it? Because I think that you'll find you end up having a much more effective partnership if you think of it more as like a long-term strategy than something that I just need to do to plug a hole.
Yeah. So, I think thinking long-term strategies is always good, but there's the short-term necessity of hiring workers that are the lifeblood of many of these companies. So let's reduce it down to the level of what do we do at this point. So I think you've both given a nice overview of the program and the talent pipeline management. Jamie, I think you covered it in great detail there. So if I'm listening to this and I'm in a position where I have some positions to fill, and I'm thinking, well, maybe this is a way I can go, having heard some of the things you're talking about. What's the first step I take? What do I do?
Yeah, I'm happy again to start.
Yeah.
I think that the power of the employer network is so critically important. So you all are already taking the first step by, being a part of your state chamber and leaning on one another. I mean, that's one of the powerful things about TPM is collaboration with your peers. It's often more helpful if you all go at this together rather than try to go it at yourself, right? So if you're able to pool your resources as an industry, whether that be, through existing partnerships that you have or thinking about upskilling your existing workforce, you might be more effective if you go to your competitor and say, hey, if we're both experiencing the same challenge, filling that one particular job, is there any way that we can work together to try to expand our pipeline overall so that we both benefit? We find that to be the power of partnership, not just in terms of trying to improve effectiveness between you and an educator, but you all as employers yourselves can be really powerful.
Do you think there's some issues with that though? I mean, companies are to some level always proprietary about their business model, and if there are some good employees to be had, they'd rather have them for their company than look to share them with another company. So how do you get by that? How do you get companies to collaborate in the way you're talking about, given the reality of how most companies operate?
I'm laughing because when my colleague, when he was interviewing for the job, my colleague Jason Tishko, who's the co-creator of TPM, and he talked to me about TPM, I was like, employers will not do that. I don't see employers coming together and kumbaya, linking arms and going about this. But you know what? He proved me wrong. It's why I still have the job that I do, is because he proved me wrong in a big way. I think that employers are desperate enough. They can't keep their doors open. They can't take on new clients. They can't take on new projects. And, we've been going it alone for a long time. So why not try something different in ways that we can all benefit? And we've been doing TPM for, been hosting the Academy now for 5 years. We have 500 TPM practitioners across the country. And very rarely, I think maybe on one occasion, we've heard back from folks to say, well, one of the employers that was a part of the collaborative ended up benefiting a lot more than the others. So people are upset about it. That's one time of hundreds of collaboratives, thousands of employers that are engaged. It's if you go into it with a collaborative mindset and almost have that group therapy session where you're at first saying, hey, I've poached from you, you've poached from me. I tried to increase my hourly rate by $1. And then, all of all of your people left and came to me. Just get that on the table, get over it, move on, and start to be effective in partnering together.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think it's important for those employers that are going into that space to be collaborative, to also be clear about what their competitive advantage is, right? Because you can use that as a part of your recruitment strategy. So while there are some things that you all share in terms of what you're looking for, the type of people, there are still some things that are unique to your company and to your experience and maybe to your culture, whatever that is. And so you need to leverage that, I think, is in part of those conversations and make sure that you are clear what you bring that a potential employee. And the reality is, to Jamie's point earlier about the communication, there are a lot of people we know who are unemployed, and particularly in those populations, opportunity populations, or folks who've been traditionally underserved. So it's not, I don't know, I think when we start to tap into new ways and new pools of talent, we'll find that it's less about you poaching from me, but more about us really tapping into this large pool that's out there and exists that we just have not tapped into previously.
I love that. And if I can just add one thing, because it is a certainly important kind of asterisk, if you will, is to say that the way that TPM is organized is that data is supplied from individual employers, but reported back out in the aggregate level. So you're never identifying just one employer's information. As the group talks about data, they're doing it at the group level so that you can't say, okay, well, I know that this person supplied this amount of data and this person supplied this data. So that's an important thing to note, because we want to make sure that we're also not violating any antitrust laws. We don't talk about wages and trying to set wages at any set amount. That's of course would be violating the law. So there are protections built into the process.
Tricia, I'd like to talk about tapping into these untapped markets that you just mentioned a second ago. But first, just one more follow up on the question we were just talking about. So, I mean, how do you? I think you said, Jamie, that the TPM is not available in New Jersey yet. Is that correct?
Not to say it's not available. TPM is always available. It has not yet been leveraged by anyone in New Jersey.
Okay, so I mean, but someone can at this point. That's what I wanted to clarify. So someone can. So if what you're saying, if I'm an employer and what you're saying sounds attractive to me, what do I do to access or to leverage the TPM?
Encourage your chamber to to participate in the academy so that they can learn the process. Our curriculum is something that we built in-house. It's available now, and colleagues of yours are very familiar with the curriculum. So if you wanted to take that to the next step and participate in an academy so that you can facilitate and organize employer collaboratives, that would be a great step. It's not always organized by a state chamber. Sometimes and oftentimes it's local chambers that participate in these trainings, but any one of you are welcome to access the curriculum and then leverage technical assistance and expertise from our team.
And the information about how to do that is in slides we're going to be sending out to those folks who've registered and are on the call here.
Correct.
Okay. So Latricia, I wanted to go back to your comment about tapping into some other markets for talent. And I think we're having a little computer glitch. I don't know. Latricia, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you
hear me now? You went out.
Sorry,
I hear you now. Yep.
Okay. So we're talking about the untapped markets in some cases. So if I'm an employer and I'm interested in finding some new pools of talent and some of the ones you were just discussing, again, do I go through the TPM process to do that? Are there other ways to do that? Where and how do I tap into those markets?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, obviously, we would love for you to be able to go through the TPM process because it is a proven model, right, that we know works. And it also kind of take some of the, not the onus, because I think employers, and Jamie can speak to this, have a role and a responsibility in TPM, but you have a guide and folks who are helping you. That being said, as I think about our equality of opportunity work, whether you decide to leverage TPM or you want to go into this and do yourself, the encouraging is, one, to Jamie's point earlier, doing an assessment of what your needs are. Who is that opportunity population that you're looking for? What skill sets do you need and are you looking for? And then from there, it might require whoever is in charge of your recruitment process and strategies to do a little bit of research to think about what are the community organizations, are there university or community college partners? Is there an opportunity to partner with K through 12, right? Because oftentimes we're finding that business is not talking to education is not talking to business. And so there could be greater connectedness. So we think about what we're offering and training folks to do, that it actually taps back into what are the needs of that state or local community, and making sure that folks are equipped to go into those jobs. There are a number of community-based organizations across the country, and I'm sure in New Jersey, that are working with these populations in various different ways, whether it be specifically to find employment or, to build, like, I just think about, I live in Maryland. We have an organization called Wider Circle, and they are literally a wraparound service that is helping individuals who are now trying to re-enter the workforce, but they're helping them in other ways too, right? To build life skills. And they are seeing success because it's not just connecting. They have an employment group that of employees that they work with in businesses, but it's not just getting those folks connected to jobs, but because they are providing wraparound services, they're having conversations with these employers and actually supporting these individuals, and everything from learning how to manage a bank account to life skills and other things that essentially will make them a stronger employee for that employer that they're going to work with in the future. And so I really encourage businesses to think about, again, what are your needs? What are you looking for? And then it'll require, if you don't go through TPM, it's obviously going to require sitting down, doing some research, and thinking very strategically about how you're going to approach this. And I really understand even the point you were making earlier, Ray, about people need folks right now. And, that's not that it's harder, but the reality is we've got to start building in some good strategies right now that are going to lead us to where we need to be in the future.
I think that's such a great point. And I just put in the chat, again, even if employers and chambers don't go through the TPM Academy, we put together a resource in partnership with a lot of community-based organizations. Not a Wider Circle, though. I wish that I had included them in the review committee, but of leveraging framework and just trying to orient yourselves around what it means to be a partner to an opportunity population serving organization. So really thinking very thoughtfully about how you're coming to that partnership, what are the benefits that you as employers bring to that partnership, and then there's a reverse guide for opportunity for employers, so that each side kind of understands where the other one is coming from, and then there's an additional resource about how to leverage the TPM framework to kind of bridge that communications gap between what we call OPSOs, opportunity population serving organizations, and employers. So I just put that in the chat in the case that anybody would like to look into that.
And I want to add one thing, because I think, I was in the conversation a couple of weeks ago with an energy company in California that was thinking about they're trying to diversify their workforce because they realized that they need more women working in the space, and not many young women choose to go into some of those roles, but yet they pay really well. And for a lot of folks, specifically coming from opportunity populations, this is a chance to build, I won't say wealth, but yes, just to be able to grow things economically. And one of the things that I realized in that conversation that they weren't thinking about, so I throw this out there, is how do you enlist your own workforce, right? Your workforce is connected to folks in the community. And I want to assume that folks are doing that already, but not all employers are thinking that way. And so it's not just your typical recruitment team or the managers or leadership, but it's staff across the board who are, whether they're connected to organizations, whether they're working with or live in certain communities. It could be a church that you get connected with through that. It depends. again, it's unique to everyone's specific experience, but I would not underestimate how your current staff and the people that work and show up and championing your company every day could be a great resource to getting you connected with folks who could be your future employees.
Okay, I'm running a little short of time, but I do want to ask one of the questions asked earlier, but ask it a different way now to just to see how this is how you handle this. But to some of the members I've talked to and my colleagues here at the NJ Chamber have talked to, they are interested in and they want to diversify their workforce, and they do see benefits to doing so. But how do they? And the questions we get asked is, we're not getting candidates. When we do the outreach to fill the jobs, we're not getting diverse candidates to consider or to interview. I mean, in the short term, how and where and in what way can these employers reach out to find more diverse candidates to consider?
I think the question I would ask is, what that process is when you say you're not getting diverse candidates, like where you're actually going to find these diverse candidates. Because sometimes it's not waiting for folks to like come into you. Sometimes you got to reach back into, again, communities and spaces where some of these diverse candidates are. Maybe it's that they're not aware of your company or organization or whatever that looks like. And so how do you create, I hate that we keep going back to this, but I do think it's core to the work, create the right partnerships and relationships that expose these diverse candidates to your particular company and organization. Because to Jamie's earlier point, I don't know if Jamie said it like this, but if we keep fishing in the same ponds, we're going to keep getting the same results. And so how do we really, when we talk about strategy, really think strategically about, okay, where are the places that I need to go to find people to build relationships that are going to market and promote my company in a way that makes folks want to find out more about and apply to roles and jobs and opportunities.
And is there anything in your job descriptions that might be prohibiting or maybe giving someone the impression that you're not an environment that embraces inclusivity or that sees the benefits in diversity? That's something that we've heard from employers as well, is that's not difficult to do, is to just kind of evaluate your job descriptions as well and how you're posting them, to Latricia's point.
And to Latricia's point, just follow up again. So can you give me or give our participants here today a couple of ideas again, what kind of partnerships they can create in the short term in reaching out to look for more diverse candidates? I think you mentioned before some community organizations or maybe even churches, churches in particular. Are there some other tangible suggestions you can give in that realm?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, and I will get to tangible, Rick. I appreciate you wanting that. Broadly, I would say really do an audit of your community to think about who are the big institutions and the places, because that could look different for different places. But more specifically, universities, again, it could be community colleges or universities, but I would look in the education sector in those spaces. And, Jamie, you may have ideas about this because you guys are building those coalitions, for lack of a better word, across the country. But I think that, again, when you audit and you have an idea, you will know that, oh, there's an organization called Wider Circle, or there's Urban Alliance in this community. I say Urban Alliance because that's another organization, which is actually national, but they have a DC base that is getting high school students connected to jobs and exposure. So I just think that it's really auditing and looking at what is in your community, but again, more broadly, thinking about community colleges, universities, community-based organizations, those type of places. And I bet you there's some unique organizations or others in your community that I'm not even thinking about. And when you find them, please share with Jamie and I, because we always want to be able to lift up those best practices to our broader network.
Well, and even another employer like a Goodwill, right? Goodwill does a phenomenal job of partnering, and they're always looking. Amazon is another one that very purposefully is trying to attract a diverse workforce, but they don't intend to retain those folks for forever. They want them to move on to another industry, another employment opportunity. So you think sometimes outside of the box in terms of who those partners are.
Great. Okay, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. We're coming up on the top of the hour. Jamie, Latricia, thank you both for your time today and your suggestions, your expertise. Again, for everyone, we're going to send out a reminder to you shortly about how you can access a replay to this webinar if you'd like to have it. And also there'll be attached with that also a link to slides about the talent pipeline management initiative that Latricia and Jamie both spoke of. Obviously, it's worth checking out. There's some very strong resources in there that you can tap to find employees, to diversify, and to do those kinds of things. So again, I'd also like to thank Bank of America for its sponsorship of this and the series of webinars on diversity that we're doing this year. And again, if you have a minute, you go on the Bank of America website and check out what they're doing. As Tom said at the beginning, they've committed more than $1 billion towards a series of diversity advancement programs, and a lot of them are underway already, and many more coming. It's very interesting. You should go on and check it out. So, Jamie, Latricia, again, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.